do for you? And she said, go to church with me. And I said, absolutely. And that Sunday, I went to church with her, and we got saved together. And she is one of my best friends. I'm the godfather of her son.
Wow.
And it was just such a powerful moment in my life. Now, still took me a while to get clean. This is 2001, 2002. I went to my last rehab in 2007. But after that rehab, I moved to the state that I'm in now, North Carolina. And I was 1 year, 2012, I was at least a year into working with children. And we were doing a fundraiser at a church. And I was up there speaking. And when I was up there speaking, I remembered that I was told I was going to be in North Carolina working with kids. Now, this is 11 years later. Here I was working with kids in North Carolina. What a confirmation that was for me, that I was on the right track.
For sure.
Yeah.
I know that nugget of truth and journey is going to affect people under our voices in so many different ways. And before I start a topic, sometimes I'm led to dive in and deal with matters aside from the topic, because at that present time there is a listener or several listeners that need to hear that. So I know just hearing that journey, I know it was powerful just hearing it. And just,
you can change everything about what you've done. And I think it's when you finally believe, when you finally give your life over to your higher power, to me, that's God. He will do amazing things. You can come back from the deepest pit. You can make amends. You can reconstruct yourself. You can rebrand yourself, and you can be out there helping people. So, we did get off topic, and I apologize for that.
No, it was definitely necessary. No need to apologize. I never apologize to my listeners, because I know at that given moment, it's something that somebody needs to hear, and you definitely covered two main areas, the alcohol addiction and the drug addiction, which is running rapid through the country right now, and mainly because nobody's really talking about it, but they're talking about the after effects. Well, with DUI and this person got served, this type of charges. But let's talk about really face the addictions, face forward, and really dive into it. And I love the fact that you wanted to start, because this is going to be a 2-part segment for our listeners, where we're gonna be honored to have you speak also on Thursday. And you said you wanted to start with habits and routines. And I'll let you spearhead that topic right now and just dive into it, and then I'll just ask my questions when necessary. But
sure.
let's now deal with the habits and routines around that topic.
Sure. So when you're rebuilding yourself, when you're coming out of addiction, when you're coming out of unregulated mental health, and you're entering recovery, you've got years of bad habits and bad routines that are pretty much surrounded on two elements that see a lot of light. And one is called the habit cycle. And it goes trigger, behavior, reward, crave. It's a 4-part cycle. So trigger, behavior. So behavior, reward. So, you'll get a reward. Now, a good story that goes with this is Febreze. I don't know if your listeners and you are familiar with that Febreze that makes your place smell good.
Of course. I got one plugged in right
Sure.
now.
Well, that Febreze came out, I want to say 12 years earlier than when it started selling. It had all the science behind it. It truly worked. Something about the molecules would grab onto the odor and dissolve it. It worked. The scientists behind it found that it worked in some of the worst smelling places. If you can imagine, I think they tried to paint the picture of a house with an old lady and 20 or 30 cats in the story.
Uh-huh.
So they had to get rid of, like, the cat smell. So it worked, and it was proven to work, but it would not sell for some reason. So after many VPs trying to market it, they finally got a guy in there that understood the habit cycle and understood that if you can get people to crave Febreze, you're going to sell more. Mm-hmm. So that's when the advertisement came out that, you clean your son's room, you throw their dirty socks in the hamper, you change the sheets, then you wash them, and at the very end, when it's all clean, you give it a spray of Febreze. And it accessed that part of the brain that wanted the reward for a job well done and made you crave it. And once they did that, once they marketed it that way, it took off. Mm. So we have to, as when we enter recovery, we have to understand the habit cycle, because we're going to use the habit cycle to create new routines. But let me tell you about how similar it is to another part of your brain called the context-dependent memory. The CDM, context-dependent memory. It is a couple systems, it's in the primitive area of your brain, that goes trigger, behavior, reward, and then depending on how much reward you get, how much dopamine is released. Mm. It decides if it's life-sustaining, if it's needed for life, to sustain your life. So an example of that would be trigger, hunger, behavior, eat, get a reward of dopamine, and your brain says, dependent on how much dopamine you get, says, okay, that's life-sustaining. That's the system that is so similar to the habit cycle that is taken over in drug addiction, alcoholism, and I would even say unregulated mental health issues. Mm. So trigger, I'm thinking about my trauma as a child. Behavior, I use drugs. I get an abnormal, increased amount of dopamine, more than most people. And my brain says, this is survival related. So, and repeat behavior. It's survival related, and so repeat behavior. So over time, it becomes the number one behavior. It's ahead of eating. It's ahead of procreating or having sex. It's ahead of bathing. It's the number one. It becomes the number one survival-related behavior. So when you have a brain that is telling you that if you don't use drugs, you're going to die, that's what you have to overcome in recovery. And you do it. Go ahead.
So you would say that some of the signs of noticing you're actually an addict or addicted, or it's other words that you can use to run parallel to being an addict, but That's the more direct word. But addicted, fiend, there's so many different words. But would you say,
sure.
So there are certain signs that you can see that will label you actually an addict. You'll top that craving, that want over everything else. Like you're clean, you're bathing, you're eating, you're breathing, everything else.
Well, there are some levels to where you're a functional addict.
Okay.
Let's just say that. So you're a functional addict. You go to work every day. You make sure you eat every day. But you still, have to have your fifth of Jack every night. Mm-hmm. I think my grandparents were functional addicts.
I think my grandmother was functional addict.
Sure, right? I mean, so, and some, when you're addicted to some things, like if you were addicted to beer, or alcohol. Now you can go to the extreme where you end up homeless and everything else. It's a lot different than being addicted to opiates.
In what sense?
In you become more of a criminal.
When you're on opiates or when you're on alcohol?
When you're on opiates, because alcohol, for $5-10 you can get a pretty substantial amount of brown or white, whatever it is you drink. As an opiate addict, sometimes your habit gets up to $300-400 a day easily.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So there's a higher percentage of a criminal element when you're addicted to cocaine or something that you need. Well, something that's not sold on the shelves for $5. And even it. Go ahead.
Is that realistic? To a person can blow up to like $2,000 in their cravings?
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess it's the same.
So.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So, you run in tribes. You have your people. You call your people up every day. You figure out how you're going to get the money, and it's not always good. So, this is the train wreck that people have to deal with when they get clean. There is a lot of shame and guilt for the things that you did as an addict that you have to reconcile. And the best way to reconcile that is to agree and accept that a sub-personality was born in you when your brain lied and told you drugs were needed to survive. A sub-personality was born in you that was going to live within you and allow you to do the things that you were going to need to do to survive. They're totally against your values. I'm not a liar, but I've lied. I'm not a thief, but I've stolen. And when you get clean, one excellent way to deal with that shame and guilt and that train wreck that you have left in your wake is to squash that sub-personality. And you do that by finding your values and living by them again. Values equals thoughts equals values equals ideas equals thoughts equals behaviors. So your values and your behaviors have to be in line. And that's the way you squash that sub-personality. You can continue to feed it by continuing to lie, continuing to steal, but that just keeps that disassociation from who you really are going. So
before you even take measures to reconcile with others, you have to reconcile with yourself.
You can do them at the same time, but you've got the others so well trained with your behaviors. They know how to act. They can smell when you're lying. It is helpful to become a different person and show them that you're becoming a different person, that reinstituted, you found